Hey, what's up? This is Kev from the Falafel House Fantasy Football Podcast, and you're listening to the BS Podcast Network. Enjoy the show.
In a world of ordinary fantasy football podcasts, ordinary guys rise up to bring you extraordinary analysis and entertainment. This is the Falafel House Fantasy Football Podcast with your hosts Kevin Cotillo, Sal Lito, and Stephen Marcus.
West Coast here.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Today is May 2nd, and it is Tuesday, May 2nd, Sal, because I know you like to know what day of the week it is.
Tuesday. He gets forgetful.
Listen, I am sorry. I'm already starting off terribly, but look, we haven't had a show in a while, so I can't really be blamed.
Definitely out of practice.
A little out of practice. We're a little rusty. Well, I am rusty. I assume these two other guys with me, Steve Marcus and Sal Lito, will bring it for us and make sure that we're on track, because clearly I'm not there. So, what's up, guys? How's it been? How's you? Wow.
I missed you guys.
Oh. Hey, Rusty.
Oh, just a little.
You guys
rusty.
ever hear like a name and it reminds you of something all the time, and you always think about it? Whenever I hear Rusty, it reminds me of European Vacation when we're up on the Eiffel Tower, and the French girl looks at me and says, "Rusty." Every time we say Rusty, I'm going to think of that.
Nice. Well, we're
You
very
only have
rusty.
to explain that to half the listeners.
Well, Steve always thinks of trombones when he hears Rusty.
That's awkward. All right.
This is a great start.
Yeah, we're doing very well. But look, hey, the NFL draft happened recently, so at least we have some stuff to talk about. We apologize for not coming to you over the last couple of weeks. We tried. We were going to try, and then, Sal said no, and Steve cried, and it was just a big mess. So
There's a lot of tears.
yeah, there's a lot of tears. But we are back. We are ready to bring you some draft analysis. A lot of big things happened during the draft. A lot of players falling to good spots. A lot of players falling to bad spots. We'll start off real quick with you, Steve. What was your overall thought about the draft? Give me a couple of quick thoughts on what you took out of the draft.
I thought it was a very interesting draft. Is that I'm not sure a lot of players fell in spots that people were happy with right off the bat. I think there was a lot of complaining going on about certain players going to certain teams. And I think everyone just has to remember that not every year does somebody go to the most perfect position where like Ezekiel Elliott being drafted to the Cowboys last year. He landed in a golden spot. So I just, we had Christian McCaffrey, who we're going to talk about, going to Carolina. A lot of people weren't happy with that fit. Joe Mixon going to Cincinnati. People right off the bat weren't happy with that fit. But I think as time goes by, as training camps goes through, the real good players are going to rise to the top, and they are going to make their names be heard. So I just think there was a lot of initial shock and not a lot of happiness from a fantasy aspect to where players landed.
Yeah,
Don't you think most people were unhappy that Mixon landed anywhere?
I was.
Yeah.
Listen, I will say I agree with you, Steve. I think that this draft, it's funny. My wife actually asked me what I thought of the draft, and was there anything, big that happened that from a fantasy perspective. And I actually said to her, no. I don't think, the top guys are still the top guys. I don't know that anyone really fell in value based on where they landed. I don't know anyone really increased in value. I mean, I think Corey Davis going to the Titans was a obviously we'll talk about him a little bit too. I think that was probably the best fit, for where a guy actually got drafted. But overall, I just, guys kind of landed in spots that were okay, or not terrible, and we'll get into it a little bit more. Sal, what were your thoughts?
Well, unfortunately, Steve couldn't join us, but Kevin and I we took part in the Bull Rush podcast Shotcast, so we were on live during the draft, and early on, I think the thing that got me was
your microphone
it
was
seemed
off?
like that definitely was about the first 8 to 10 minutes of the show. My mic was not working. Most people were probably happy about that. No, was that it seemed like, wow, a lot more offensive players are going than we expected. It seemed like a very fantasy relevant draft early on, and then when you look back, I'm pretty sure 19 defensive players were taken in the first round. So it ends up balancing out overall. I only got to watch the first, second, and third rounds. The later rounds, I unfortunately had to work that day, so I could not watch that live. So I didn't get the initial reaction on that. But I think it went a little chalk somewhat with McCaffrey and Fournette and guys like that early. The Trubisky thing, I think, shocked all of us. The Bears moving up one spot. I think we thought they would go for a quarterback at 3, and them trading what they did to get him at 2. I don't know how that made sense to me, but there must have been another team trying to trade up to get ahead of them. It's the only logical thing that we could think about. And then the Pat Mahomes situation, I think it sounds like it was pretty clear. No teams will admit this afterwards, but I do believe the Saints came out and said that they do love Mahomes. He was probably going to go to the Saints, and the Chiefs spent a pretty penny to move up. But I heard somebody say in the Giants organization they wouldn't have taken him at 23 if he was sitting there. So there's some mixed reviews on Mahomes and where he goes. But overall, I don't think there was anything very shocking that came out of this draft.
All right, so we are going to get into all of the different picks that we liked, but we're going to do it a little differently. Most podcasts right now will be doing either a mock draft, rookie draft, or they'll go through the draft 1 through 32 and then beyond and all of that. But we're going to do it a little different. We're going to go team by team, guys. We're going to go, a couple of divisions per show. We're going to try and pump out a couple of shows. Yeah, I think our once every 3 weeks is a good schedule for us, though. So we'll take it easy. We should be done by July.
It's perfect.
Yeah, no, we'll try to get we haven't nailed down the schedule yet, but we'll try to get a few out in the next couple of weeks and go through all these divisions. We're going to start tonight with the Southern boys, the NFC South and the AFC South, and we will start the night off by introducing a repeat guest, someone who has again agreed to come back on the show, which is rare. For the Tampa Bay Bucks, Greg Auman, who is a writer for the Tampa Bay Times, and he is the host of the Locked On Bucks podcast. He's going to come in and talk to us a little bit about the Tampa Bay Bucks draft. All right, Greg, we want to thank you for coming on, and welcome to the show. We'll get right into the questions real quick because we know you got some time issues here. We got to move along. So I want to ask you, I'm going to start off real quick by asking you about the running backs. Obviously, it's a bit of a mess there. The Doug Martin has been touted as being, doing all the right things, saying all the right things, working out really well. But obviously, he has the suspension. Super talented guy that, just can't seem to get it all together. So, and then you have Charles Sims, who was a guy that was, on again, off again. But it looks like he's going to be falling very far down the draft, the depth chart here. They bring back Jacquizz Rodgers, and a guy who had some success last season, and seems to fit in the offense pretty well. But overall, it looks like it's a bit of a mess. So, what are your thoughts on these guys going forward?
If Jacquizz Rodgers is playing well, they can move on from him if they want to. They have some flexibility right now. I think people wanted an answer. I think they wanted a number 1 draft pick and cutting Doug Martin, or no running back at all, and it was clear that Doug Martin's the guy. And instead, you're still a little bit in between. They're kind of hedging their bet. And as a result, you might have something where none of the 4 has a high draft value. And it's hard to tell how it'll shake out. I mean, it's definitely kind of by committee right now, given what they have and what they've invested in all 4. But like you said, the most accurate thing to say is that it's a mess.
That's crazy to hear after so many years of Charles Sims being touted as one of those sleeper guys that can really make that big move. But moving on to wide receivers, you mentioned at the beginning that they drafted Chris Godwin in the 3rd round. They also added Deshaun Jackson in free agency, and of course everybody knows that they have Mike Evans. So do you think these Buccaneers have a chance to have one of the best wide receiving cores in the league this year?
Best in the league, I don't know. I mean, I think if you add in the tight ends, they'll be pretty good. They still have, limited depth beyond those three. But no, to add, I mean, if you think about overall what they've done for Jameis Winston, they spent most of last year with Adam Humphries as their number 2 receiver, and with a bunch of, waiver wire types as the 3 through 5. So to add DeSean Jackson, as you said, to add Chris Godwin, to have Humphries in kind of a slot role or a 4 role, they're definitely much better. How that splits up, how many touchdowns that equates to for Winston, I'll be curious to see, but it'd be easy for him to, I think he had 28 this past season. It'd be easy for him to improve on that just by the sheer volume of what he has around him. Their second tight end last year had 7 catches, and now it's O.J. Howard, or Cam Brate is the second. And so there's a whole lot of room for growth there. So whether it's taking touchdowns out of somebody's pocket and putting them in somebody else's, or it's adding touchdowns remains to be seen. But this is an offense. If it plays the way it seems, you could easily see Winston go from 27 touchdowns to 35 touchdowns. It wouldn't take that much. It's just a matter of, how well they can click and how well Winston can make sure he doesn't increase his interceptions as much as he does a touchdown.
Well, moving along to the tight ends, you've spoken about Howard, and you touched on Brate real quick. How do you think this affects Brate's fantasy value? I mean, he was a guy last year that when we spoke to you in training camp last year, it was a guy you pointed out would be someone you'd want to grab and stash because there was a good chance he would really show prominence last year. And it looked like he was going to be another great grab this year. We all did some dynasty startup leagues, and he was being grabbed, and people were spending money up in auctions. And now, hindsight, maybe that wasn't such a great deal. Do you think he still holds solid fantasy value, or is this going to be O.J. Howard's position?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard. You sit there and you say, well, if you add, a first-round pick to the mix for him, his percentage of the targets certainly goes down. I would be very impressed if he matched his 8 touchdowns again next year. Let me say that. Now, I think the tight end group, if you will be a bigger part of things than it was last year, just because last year it was just great and it was really about it. I mean, they got, I shouldn't say that, and I think Alan Cross had a touchdown. I think ASJ had maybe 2 early in the year, but this is a team that could have 10 or 12 tight end touchdowns, this coming season. Now, how that splits up, we don't know. Is that 6 for O.J. Howard and 6 for Brate? I don't know. But I do know that, Brate was easily their best red zone target. So now it's a question of, are they going to be better at avoiding the red zone entirely and having longer touchdowns and DeSean Jackson going with a deep ball that they really didn't have at all last year? Or are they still looking for red zone targets? And then the idea of them lining up 4 wide with Mike Evans, DeSean Jackson, O.J. Howard, and Cam Brate with a running back in the backfield, that's not an easy 5 to cover. And I think the tight ends could very well benefit from that. So there aren't many other teams I can think of right now that have 2 tight ends that are viable fantasy players. I guess you saw it last year a little bit with Gates and Hunter Henry. I think they had like 6 and 8 touchdowns. I suppose you'll have it a little bit this year in New England with their tight ends, assuming everybody's healthy. But no, it's going to be a curious thing to see in the fantasy leagues who goes first between those 2, whether it's the upside of the upside of Howard as a new tight end in this. One thing I'll warn you about is I went back and looked at first-round tight ends and what their production is like their rookie year. It's not very good. Averages like 28 catches for 310 yards and 2 scores. The only first-round tight end in the last 20 years to get more than 4 touchdowns was Heath Miller with the Steelers in 2005. The only rookie first-round tight end to get more than, I think, 550 yards was Jeremy Shockey, and that's all the way back to 2002. So traditionally, it's not a position where even highly drafted tight ends can make a big splash. Even Vernon Davis, who was 6th overall, even Eric Ebron, when he was 10th overall, those types, it's still 2 or 3 touchdowns most of the time. So, last year when Hunter Henry made a splash, that was kind of the exception to the rule. So I don't want to put a limitation on what Howard can do, but traditionally it's not a position that makes a huge fantasy splash in year 1.
Yeah, that's a great point. And in fantasy, we talk about recency bias, and that Hunter Henry is the thing that's in everybody's mind, and they think that, that's something that could be replicated because Howard comes out with a better pedigree. But I agree with you. even when we spoke to Mike Wright last year, he tried to make sure he told us first-year tight ends generally do not produce fantasy value.
I looked. I think all time there's been like 48 4-touchdown seasons by rookie tight ends ever. So, and that's like in the Super Bowl era. So you're talking about less than one a year. And some of those are freakish ones. I think Joe Faria had a big year with the Lions when he was a rookie. Tim Wright with the Bucs a couple of years back had like 5 touchdowns as a rookie. More often, it's almost some random low-round guy that just happens to become a red zone target than it is these high-end types. Even, you go back to, Jason Witten was okay as a rookie, but a lot of these guys, Tony Gonzalez, was mortal as a rookie, and didn't have what you expect. You think about Tony Gonzalez being 80 catches and 8 touchdowns or something, and he did that when he was 35. He didn't do that when he was 22. So, yeah, it's definitely something to put a little bit of a damper on your excitement with O.J. Howard and also with Njoku and Ingram and any other tight ends you're excited about.
All right, so you spoke about Winston a little bit, but his ascension into a top 10 fantasy QB, and in a lot of people's minds this year, they feel like he might even step up to a top 5. You think that he could produce a 30 to 35 passing season and maybe add in a few rushing touchdowns this year?
Yeah, no, I think that's very reasonable because he had 28 last year with minimal targets. I think he benefited from the lack of a solid run game and had to throw more. There were games early in the season he was throwing the ball 52, 58 times. The Bucs don't like that at all. The Bucs would like him to be 27 pass attempts, something like that. So I do think some of his numbers this past year were a function of them falling behind early, needing to throw late in close games, not having to lead a whole lot in games. So, like I said, the main reason you'd be excited about Winston, you'd say he could be +5 in touchdowns or +8 in touchdowns, is just the talent around him. Just Deshaun Jackson, right? If you had Deshaun Jackson as a number 2 receiver, if he gets 8 touchdowns, okay, and even if Mike Evans comes down from 12 to 10, that gives you 18, you add, again, 10 at the tight end position, now you're at 28, 5 to the running backs, now you're at 33. So it's not hard to do the math and see where he could improve. But again, part of that will be, are they up? Are they a team that can run the ball a lot in the second half? Because they really didn't get in those situations very often. So it's almost like the better the offense gets, the less likely it is to have gaudy passing numbers a little bit. But no, I think he'll be better than he was last year in yards and in touchdowns. So the rushing, I can't tell whether he'll run. He didn't really run that much last year compared to his rookie year. But no, as a fantasy guy, he's definitely intriguing just because they put so much into improving everything around.
Okay, Greg, before we let you run along, I want to ask you about 2 guys, 2 former Bucs that have left. And one is Vincent Jackson. He's come out and said that he still wants to play. And the other guy is going to be Mike Glennon. And when Glennon left there, obviously he was leaving to go be the starter with the Bears. And I believe he obviously will still be the starter with the Bears. But I'm sure he thought he was going there to get the opportunity to really take hold of that position. And with Trubisky getting taken at 2, that's just not plausible. Within a year from now, they'll be looking to move Trubisky into the starting role. Do you keep in touch with him by any chance? And, what do you think is going on in his mind? And if you could touch on Vincent Jackson after that.
Yeah, for Glennon, it's disappointing in the sense that I think he had the opportunity to be a starter that he wasn't going to have in Tampa. Tampa had a fair amount of stability and familiarity. Had he gone back there, I think they would have given him about $8 million just to be a backup. But you want to have the chance to be a starter, the chance to get on the field without an injury. And he might have that initially in Chicago, but, he's going to have such a limited leash in terms of what he can do wrong, or if the team stumbles at all in terms of losses, you get to that mode where you have a number 2 overall pick at quarterback, you need to get him on the field. Even if you think he's not ready, his development becomes more important than that year 1 wins or losses. So if they come out of the gate 2-4, Mike Glennon might be done. And then you'd rather lose with Trubisky than go 500 with Glennon at that point. But for Mike Glennon, I only feel so bad. He's getting $18.5 million for 1 year.
Yeah, I hear that.
Like I said, disrespect me that way all day long.
Great point.
So, But no, there's a very good chance he'll be a free agent again a year from now, and have to do the same thing. I mean, he's not so compelling an upside guy that you just take him and don't have a plan B. And I think most people thought that the Bears would do something in the draft. I don't think they thought they'd trade up to 2 and take Trubisky. So, I mean, to that extent, I feel bad for Mike, because I think Mike would have liked to just have at least one season to show the world what he can be as a starting quarterback again. He hasn't really had that with a good team in his career. But again, if he comes out of the gate and they're 4-0, it's going to be hard to take the ball away from him for a developmental guy. I mean, with rookie quarterbacks, if there's not a need for them, you can get by with somebody else as long as they're winning. But like I said, that's going to be tough to do in Chicago with Mike Glennon. So he has a real limited window. Vincent Jackson, I mean, I don't know that Vincent Jackson's going to play again. I think he's kept the door open. I will say it's been a long time since Vincent's played in a playoff game. So if he were to come back, I do think it would be, if he were to move away from Tampa, I think it'd have to be for just an A-list, top-tier playoff team. If the Patriots came calling and said, hey, come be our number 4 receiver, get 30 catches and win a Super Bowl, that would be compelling for him. I think he knows he's not going to come in nearly what he did. I mean, he was getting $11 million last year. He'll be lucky to get a third of that now at his age, and given that he's had a lot of injury problems in the last 2 years. Great guy, great ambassador for the Bucs, very adored here in Tampa. I just think they've moved on. I kind of thought that when they had Deshaun Jackson. Now they put a draft pick into Chris Godwin. There's not a meaningful role for him. It'd be nice to have him as a veteran presence, as a mentor, but they kind of already has that with Deshaun. I mean, Deshaun's been in the league long enough where he's going to be a positive influence on the younger receivers they have. So I feel bad if this is how Vincent goes out, because the last 2 years weren't very indicative of who he's been as a receiver in the league. But barring a compelling offer from a really strong playoff team, I don't know if it's in the mix for him.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Greg, for joining us. We know you got to run, but we appreciate you coming on. Do you anything you want to plug or anything you need to get out there?
No, it's fine. I'm on Twitter, Greg Auman, GregAuman. You can read me at TampaBay.com. But no, thanks again for having me, guys. I really appreciate it.
Excellent. No, thank you for coming on. We look forward. Hopefully, we'll get you back again in training camp.
All right. Take care, guys.
All right. Thanks.
Thanks, Greg.
All right. Thanks again to Greg Auman for coming on tonight. We really appreciate it. Definitely get on to Twitter and check out Greg at Greg Auman.
He's a good follow. Good follow on Twitter.
Yeah, he gives a lot of good information. That's a great point, Steve. So thank you again. We're going to move on now. So, Sal, let's talk a little bit about the Carolina Panthers. We'll start off with McCaffrey because obviously that's the big name here. But they also drafted, so Christian McCaffrey goes in the first round. They also drafted Curtis Samuel, the running back, wide receiver, whatever you want to call him, out of Ohio State, and a kicker. Got to make sure you mention the kickers. But what are your thoughts on McCaffrey, Sal?
Yeah, I'm a big fan of McCaffrey. If you remember back when we had Matt Wallman on, I had asked him specifically, looking back on this draft in 5 years, who do you think is the running back that will have had the most success? And I felt it would be McCaffrey. He agreed as well. Overall, people don't like the landing spot for him, like Steve pointed out earlier, because it's not conducive to what Cam Newton does, right? Dumping the ball off to a running back is not his thing. Usually when it breaks down, he takes off with the ball. So I think that they're looking to protect Cam. He's far too valuable to continue to take the hits and take the pounding that he takes when running the ball. So I think that it's going to take a little bit of time to get Cam used to looking for that outlet pass as opposed to taking off up the field. But once he gets comfortable with it, McCaffrey's the ideal guy to hold that position. We've said it before. He's just so fluid and crisp in the way he runs routes and the way he takes off after the ball, the yards after the catch. I'm impressed with him. I mean, in any one of the auctions that we're doing right now, rookie auctions that we're all involved in, the prices are just skyrocketing for him, and it's almost hard to keep up with what he's going for. So I think overall people feel the same way. So maybe the rookie year, getting used to the offense and Cam getting used to him, maybe he doesn't put up the huge numbers that you'd love, but he's a guy especially in dynasty leagues, years to come it's gonna be greatly successful.
So Steve, I'll switch over to you real quick. Do you think that the Curtis Samuel being picked in the second round there, obviously listed as a wide receiver from Ohio State, but a guy that's been sort of projected to be kind of a combo wide receiver, running back, maybe a better version of Tavon Austin type of thing. Do you think that he hurts McCaffrey's value a little bit? Obviously, they still have Jonathan Stewart there and some other guys in the backfield, but McCaffrey's been touted as one of the better pass catching running backs, obviously. So does this hurt him a little bit?
I don't think it does, because I don't think Curtis Samuel is on near the same playing level as Christian McCaffrey. That was one of the more confusing picks in the draft, with all of the needs that the Panthers seem to have. For them to take Christian McCaffrey in their first-round pick, which is completely understandable because of the type of caliber player he is, for them to draft a player that has somewhat of a very similar skill set was very confusing to me. So I don't think that it's going to hurt Christian McCaffrey. I just don't really see the value from a fantasy perspective of Curtis Samuel this year, because I see them as doing a lot of the same things. And to go off of Sal's point, talking about how he wasn't necessarily a good fit, a tweet from Pat Thorman the other day shows a chart of passes aimed 5 yards down the field or less. Cam Newton ranks last at only a 55% completion percentage, and the only quarterback with more interceptions than touchdowns. He threw 5 interceptions and only 1 touchdown. So that type of pass with a wide or a running back coming out of the backfield is just not what Cam Newton does very well. I know he doesn't necessarily do it all the time because he does have that inclination to tuck the ball and run, but even when he is throwing the ball, he's not doing it well. You guys see him throw on while you're watching the games. The guy has a cannon. He throws the ball 150 miles an hour. And that just is not the type of touch that you need when you're tossing it to the sideline, to have your guy catch the ball and turn up field and run, which is what McCaffrey does so well. So going back to the Curtis Samuel thing, I don't think that hurts Christian McCaffrey at all, but I am definitely one of those people that is not in love with that landing spot for him.
Yeah, I mean, I got to say, I like the McCaffrey landing spot. I do like that. I think they're going to try and fix this offense a little bit for me. You bring up some good points there, Steve, about Cam Newton and his throwing style and what he likes to do and what he succeeds at. But I think they're trying to change that a little bit, right? I think they need to start taking some pressure off him, not only from a throwing standpoint, but also from a running standpoint. He can't be the guy that's being focused on for first downs and touchdowns. And I think McCaffrey's going to try and help that, because I think McCaffrey's a little bit better of an inside runner than people give him credit for. And I do think that they will try to do some more screens out of the backfield and things like that and try to improve that part of their game. And that's why I think that Curtis Samuel might actually eat into some of this. And that's why I would be a little concerned about Curtis Samuel, because, they took him in the second round. It's not like he's a 5th round pick. They're gonna try to use him. I do think that he'll play a little bit more of a, he'll work in the Ted Ginn role a little bit as well, because he is a speedster and he can run those types of routes. But I do think that they'll try to, work him in and get him some touches, because he is kind of dynamic with the football. So there are two guys in my mind that sort of do very similar things, and that's what makes me nervous when you have those two guys drafted consecutively. I guess we'll see, right? Looking at the rest of the draft for the Panthers, really not a whole lot to talk about. They've taken an offensive tackle in the second round as well, Taylor Mawton. They need to shore up that line and help protect Cam Newton, so maybe that will help. I don't know much about the offensive line prospects, but hopefully, you take a second-round tackle, you hope he's going to help. And, most of their draft is defense outside of that. So any other thoughts on Carolina before we move along?
Yeah, I think that maybe there's probably more of a receiving role available for Samuel if Chunky Monkey over there can't get himself on the field. All the rumors out of Carolina is that Kelvin Benjamin might be up around 270 to 280 pounds right now. So
280. That is huge.
That
is huge. That's bigger than Eddie Lacy.
They're going to need to replace Olsen soon. Maybe he's thinking tight end.
Oh my God. Let's see what happens. But I mean, talk about a guy who, Jamarcus Russell is way out of the league.
So I will say that is a good
water weight.
Yeah, water weight. That is a good point, though, Sal. I mean, there's really not a lot else out there for them as far as receivers. Obviously, Benjamin had a terrible season. I think Devin Funchess, it's clear that he's not the answer. And Ted Ginn's gone. He's moved on. So I don't really know. I mean, Olsen is what he is, but he's getting older, too. So They definitely need pass catchers, so I think you're right that there is a role for them. I just worry about them kind of canceling each other out a little bit. From
my Russell Shepard hold in the Power Hungry League doesn't look so stupid now, does it?
Sure.
No, it does.
Yep.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, still bad.
Still
My bad.
Speaking of wide receivers, a team that has an awful lot of them is the New Orleans Saints. But they didn't do too much else from an offensive perspective in this draft. Obviously for me was a big shocker in Alvin Kamara, running back out of Tennessee, being drafted. I don't know why they took him, except other than it's the third round and 67th pick overall. This is a guy that a lot of people were talking could be a second round pick or potentially even sneaking into the late first round. There were some people that thought that was a possibility. So I guess the value there was really good. But Steve, what are your thoughts here? I mean, I was just shocked. you have Mark Ingram. They signed Adrian Peterson, and now you're drafting another running back.
Yeah, that was the weird thing, is that we haven't had a podcast in a while, so Adrian Peterson is now a member of the Saints. Everybody knows that by now. And so I think it became more of a value thing. They saw that he was still there in that third round, and he does have the type of skill set that would garner at least a second round grade. You just mentioned that he was even, people heard that he might be sneak up into the end of the first round. So I think it became a value play for them, and I think he has a skill set that Mark Ingram and Adrian Peterson don't necessarily have. One of his biggest knocks was that he wasn't a between the tackles runner. He might not have the durability to, be a 3-down back and be able to do that kind of thing. So I think this is a great spot for him landing in New Orleans, where he's not going to be relied upon to do that type of work. He's going to be able to be used as a passing down back. He's going to be able to use maybe in a slot role every once in a while, because that is what he does best. He catches the ball, and he's very shifty once he gets the ball, and he can move upfield. He's got good vision upfield. I really liked him when I started doing my film research on all of these running backs for this year. I was a huge fan of his, but then the durability issues really started to worry me a little bit, so that's what kind of made me knock him down. So I actually really like this landing spot. Not a ton of pressure on him he's not going to have to be the main workhorse. I do think that Mark Ingram has a pretty good chance of being dealt sometime before the beginning of the season, so I'm going to be looking out for that. And just why do you guys think Sean Payton hates Mark Ingram so much? What did they do? What happened?
I just think it.
Nude pictures of his wife.
Hello. It's got to be the injuries and the inconsistency at times, and I think that Ingram will probably still be on the team this year, and I think that Kamara, it probably doesn't hold redraft value this year. I mean, if you're in a deep league, a 14-team league, 16-team league, then you're going to want to grab him. But if you're in a dynasty league, this guy I'm walking away because he's going to be the running back. He's going to be the featured running back next year. Peterson's not going to play more than 1 year, in my opinion. And if he does, they'll transition out of him next year. I do believe if they brought Peterson into the game this year, he could give Peterson probably every chance to do as much as he can. And I think they'll transition out of Ingram, and this will be Kamara's job next year. So he's a guy you could probably get cheaper than the top guys, the Fournettes and the Dalvin Cooks and even Joe Mixon and McCaffrey, that you can lock away, and I can imagine you're going to get him for years to come. And it makes sense now that they let Hightower get away from them, because they replaced him with this guy, and I like his talent. I know, Steve, this was a guy you liked early on. You spoke about him much.
Yep, absolutely. So you don't have any worries about him being a durable running back?
Yeah, the worries exist, but I think that he's going to get the opportunity to do it. I mean, he's 5'10", 214 pounds. So, if you say 214 pounds, but at 5'10", that's a pretty solid, stocky size. So I think he's built to hold up to the NFL pounding, and he's got great elusiveness, and he can catch the ball. So
good hands. It's fun to watch, that's for sure.
Yeah, so for me, I'm kind of looking at him in that Reggie Bush role, right? I mean, you really think that he could be that? And I'm just pulling up Reggie Bush's stats from, his time in New Orleans, and man, he had a lot of targets. 121 targets in his first year, 88 receptions, and 742 yards and 2 touchdowns. So Sal, while I agree with you, I think this is a guy that you might want to stash, because obviously, we'll see what happens with Ingram, and Adrian Peterson is there. There's a chance he slots right into that role. I'm not saying he's going to get 121 targets or 88 catches, but there's a chance there, right? I mean, that he's going to see solid production. The lowest amount of catches that that Reggie Bush had in New Orleans was 34 in 2010, and that was because he played 8 games. So I can see a lot of volume in the passing game, so PPR leagues, those kind of things. I think he's a guy that you might actually get some value out of this year.
Yeah, I think if he avoids being targeted by a Kardashian, it's probably better for his career as well.
I don't know. I heard Chloe's on the hunt.
Oh, gosh. I hope Kamara's faster than we've seen then.
All right, the Saints also took an offensive tackle in the first round, Ryan Ramczyk, who was a guy that was pretty hot prospect. They got him at 32. Some people thought he might go earlier in the first round. That's something they need there, and obviously that's going to help the running backs. It should help Drew Brees a little bit. Any other thoughts on the New Orleans Saints, obviously from a draft perspective, or what they've done so far this offseason?
Did they end up getting a quarterback in any round in that draft?
They did not draft a quarterback in this draft.
Yeah, they still do not have a tight end on the roster.
They don't have a tight end on the roster?
I don't believe so.
Well,
there's Coby Fleener.
Coby Fleener doesn't really count, so I see where you're saying there.
Yeah.
Coby Fleener, top 5 tight end in New Orleans.
Awesome.
That's probably pretty close to accurate there, Sal.
I don't even think he's the 5th best tight end on that team.
I mean, listen, if you want to get outside of rookies this year, Michael Thomas is a second-year player, is obviously in for a bigger role. I really, really like my man Willie Snead again this year. I think it says a lot that they were willing to let Cooks go, and they feel like he can step up and be a big producer. So he's a guy I'll be touting highly again this year, and I think he's going to really turn into a very solid wide receiver too.
Pretty sure Ted Ginn's arrival is why they felt so good about letting Ginn go, or Cook go, right? Right?
Yeah,
sure.
Absolutely.
Yeah. All right, I knew it.
I think he was drafted higher than Brandon Cooks. So, there's that.
There is that.
All right, the Super Bowl runner-ups, the Atlanta Falcons, again, pretty
feels good to say that, right, Kev?
Yeah, it does. I'm not going to lie. It feels pretty good whenever I can point out that someone lost to the Patriots, which, as you know, it happens quite a bit. So, look, the Falcons went very defensive focused in this draft. Looks like they obviously took 2 offensive players, one of which is Brian Hill, a running back in the 5th round out of Wyoming, and the other was a 5th round tight end, Eric Saubert, out of Drake. I know, Sal, you have a lot of information. I know your file on Saubert is huge, so why don't you give us your thoughts there?
Yeah, but here's what my file says. Don't draft him. Don't expect anything from him, and sometime down the road, he may be selling you a cable TV package.
So listen, I'm looking at the NFL.com draft analysis of Saubert, and they give a little quote usually by a scout or someone, an unnamed source. The sources tell us in the section in this, it starts off with, he's body beautiful, but he can't catch. So obviously that's what you want out of our tight end.
Fantastic. He's damn good looking, but he's not going to catch any balls.
Looks really great in a towel, but not in football.
Yeah, but he's not good at football. Look, I mean, he's 6'5", he's 253 pounds, and overall he worked out pretty well at the combine, I guess. So,
does he block? I mean, does it say anything about his blocking technique?
Run blocking isn't important enough to him, and doesn't always.
To talk to the front office staff of the Falcons to understand why he was drafted.
Doesn't always play to his size. Allows small defenders to crowd him. Yeah, no, this guy's not good. So
shower morale is very important these days. You guys haven't heard that?
Yeah. All right. But Brian Hill is a guy that I don't know how much you guys know about him, but he is a guy that, was touted as a potential, not a high draft pick, but he is someone that, has could potentially have some fantasy value with, Devonta Freeman doesn't look like he's getting an extension. Tevin Coleman's obviously around. Is it possible that they look to move on from Devonta Freeman and they go with this Brian Hill, who could, maybe not have some value this year, but is a prospect we should be looking at? Any thoughts on that, Steve?
I wouldn't be looking at him this year, especially in any type of redraft. You just mentioned they've got Devonta Freeman, they've got Tevin Coleman. I have to assume that if they were to move on from Freeman, that Coleman would get a pretty good chunk of money to stay. He's shown that he is a very viable running back. So not from a redraft perspective. From Dynasty, I'm sure he's going to be cheap. He probably wouldn't cost much to throw on to a deep roster, but definitely not somebody on my radar.
Yeah, I'll only add to that, Kevin, is that's something you and I even have a bet, I think, coming up this year, right? Who's going to have more fantasy points?
Yeah, we do. Which is crazy
Coleman
to me,
Freeman.
by the way, because I was always a Coleman supporter up until this past year, and I really liked what Freeman gave them, and I think that he's the better back.
We know how much I loved Freeman last year when I got him in the first year by a stroke of genius. Luck in the the original season of Falafel, where he just became, ridiculous value where I got him. Hot garbage was born. But what I said to you at that time was I was grabbing Coleman in a lot of dynasty leagues, and my reason was I think that they will move on from Freeman. I don't think that they're going to spend the money on all these weapons. And so maybe this guy Hill is someone they're bringing in to fill that position next year. If you can get him, like Steve said, very cheap. This is like a guy you're getting for $1, $5 at the back end of a rookie auction, and you stash him. You never know. You hit him. You leave him on a taxi squad all year, and then see what happens when he comes into training camp next year. He's not going to have anything to do with your redraft leagues, like Steve also pointed out. But I think that they move on from Freeman after this year. I agree.
Yeah, I do think that. This guy's, Brian Hill is 6'1". He's 219 pounds. He's got the size of an every down back, for the NFL. Big workload in college. So, I had pretty good measurables at the combine. He's 4'5", 440, and 34-inch vertical and all of that. So, I mean, he's got the measurables, I guess, to be a traditional back if they do give him some time. And so we're saying potentially Devonta Freeman could be gone. I think this is a guy you may want to stash in your dynasty leagues, at least in my mind. And you can get him late. I mean, I think we're all in a bunch of auctions and drafts right now, and I haven't seen him go yet. Have you guys?
Nope.
No, I have not even seen his name come across the page.
That's right. So, all right, guys, anything else on the Falcons before we move along? Like I said, the very defensive-heavy draft for them, so hopefully their defense is a little bit more improved over the next year.
Their defense was extremely solid in the first half.
They missed their chance. They won't be back to the Super Bowl for a few
window
years.
slammed shut, Steve.
It's gone.
Oh, that's it, huh? You're just.
She's gone.
Instinct. It's gone. It is gone.
Wow.
No Instinct fans here?
Insane.
Too old?
Yeah,
You guys are too old.
I'm not sure.
I went to Hall & Oates, which was bad enough, but you hit Insane.
Yeah, that shouldn't happen.
Dollar basis here. You're just gonna have to move on, Kev.
All right, so let's move on.
Kev was struggling enough, Steve. Don't do this to him.
You're making it worse, Steve. You're making it worse.
I have a tendency to do that.
That's true. You do regularly make this podcast worse. So.
Yep.
All right, Tennessee Titans in the AFC South. A lot of people, we touched on it a little bit at the beginning, Corey Davis, a lot of people think that this was one of the best fantasy fits in the draft. Steve, you were I think when we talked about Corey Davis a long time ago before this draft process started, you and I had a conversation about Corey Davis versus Mike Williams, and you said you had some questions on tape. Have you come around to Corey Davis, and obviously do you like the fit here?
I do like the fit. Overall, as a whole, from an NFL perspective, looking at the core that Tennessee has with Marcus Mariota, Derrick Henry, and Corey Davis, it seems like they are set up for the next 5 years at their three main offensive positions. So I do like that. And I have come around a little bit on Corey Davis. My biggest knock about him is that he seems to have a lot of focus drops, and he doesn't seem to high point the ball as much as possible. And for a guy that's as big as him, I think that I find that a little concerning. A guy that big should want to go up and get the ball and outreach everybody at every opportunity that he can. somebody that has a lot of focus drops that I'm very familiar with is Demaryius Thomas. Knock on him is that there are just too many times you're watching a game where he just drops the ball. He starts to turn up field and tries to run before he catches the ball. And you see that from Corey Davis every now and again, which is really one of the only flags that I see from him. Otherwise, he is big, he's fast, and he runs his routes very well. So I'm not surprised that he was picked this high. I am more of a Mike Williams fan, but I do like the fit here. I think he fits well with the Tennessee offense. So he is somebody that is going to be a top dynasty pick and is probably going to be inching his way up redraft leagues, more and more. He's going to be getting higher and higher. So although I am a Mike Williams fan, I don't dislike this pick, and I've come around a little bit on Corey Davis. He is going to be a pretty phenomenal talent in the NFL.
Yeah, I mean, I think he's a number one wide receiver, and that's what this team sorely needs. All apologies to Rashard Matthews. I don't think he is it, even though he did have a good season. So I think that this is a great fit. I think you're right about the drops, and hopefully that's something he can work on a little bit this year. I think that he also got a lot of free releases in college that he won't get in the NFL. So some of the press coverages that he'll see might be a little tougher, obviously, coming out of the Western Michigan program. So those types of things make me a little concerned. But this guy is a great route runner, and he has the talent to become a top flight number one NFL wide receiver, and he's going to be given the opportunity to do so. So I think it's a great landing spot for him. And
he's fast. And he's fast for a guy that big, like a Calvin Johnson, that you would not expect for him to be that quick, and he's got that type of speed. And that's the type of thing that combo is very scary for a wide receiver.
So listen, if you tuned into the Shotcast, you know that there were two Tennessee Titan fans in there. They were overly ecstatic.
I almost died.
I don't think there was a person in there that also didn't say coming out of that draft that he was the 101 in rookie drafts this year. And if you go back to the Nick Whalen episode a few weeks ago, you know that this was Nick's guy. Clear cut, this was his guy. This was the 101. He was a guy he hit on a little bit early. He was on top of him a little bit earlier. So I don't think you could go wrong in paying the price for Corey Davis.
Nope, I agree there. Some other draft picks that the Titans made: Taywan Taylor, the wide receiver out of Western Kentucky. Do we come up with a name here? Is it Jonnu Smith?
I think it's
Jonnu Smith, the tight end out of Florida International, and Khalfani Muhammad, the running back out of Cal, all drafted by the Titans here. I'm not sure that you're going to be really taking any one of these players. Taywan Taylor might be a guy that's drafted in some deeper leagues. Any thoughts on any of these guys by either of you?
Yeah, I think Taywan Taylor has already gone in the 32-team dynasty that I'm a part of.
Of course he has.
But I tell you what the drafting of Taywan Taylor does. He does different things than obviously what a Corey Davis does. I think that it hinders a guy who was a sleeper and a little bit of a darling last year. That's Tajay Sharp. I think his value takes a definite hit with these two wide receivers being added there. Rashard Matthews is obviously going to retain his position. They were happy with what they got out of him last year. I think that Delanie Walker doesn't have that much time left, maybe one really good fantasy relevant season left. The thing with Jonnu Smith is the guy's super athletic and he's big and he's fast. He also has trouble with his hands. So he's a guy I would consider taking as a flyer. I wouldn't spend a lot on him, but I do think it'll be his position to have a year from now. Outside of that, the other kid, Muhammad, is really not much on him. At most, maybe a kick returner. But I don't think that he ever comes into play. He's a guy will probably be out of the league in the next year to 2 years.
Steve, I know you got a lot to say about these guys.
Nope.
Speak now.
Sal covered it all.
All right. We will move along then to the Houston Texans, who didn't do a lot on offense again, which is surprising considering they, basically needed offense and not defense, as their defense is one of the tops in the leagues. But they draft Deshaun Watson in the first round and Deonta Foreman, the running back out of Texas. I'm going to start with you on this one, Sal. Deshaun Watson obviously steps into a situation where he will have the opportunity to win the job, given that Tom Savage is the only competition. So what do you think? Is Deshaun Watson fantasy relevant this year?
Yeah, I think he is fantasy relevant this year. I think he wins the job. I think he's the starting quarterback. I think that they like what he could bring to the table with his athleticism, and I think that they figure with their defense and having a running game that they have with Miller and Foreman, who do different things, with big-time wide receivers and a couple of guys at tight end, I think that they're going to give him the opportunity to run with this offense. So while I think in a dynasty league is hands down, he in my opinion, he's the first quarterback you're probably going to take. In a redraft league, I would take him as my number 2 quarterback. I would definitely have him in a 2 QB and a super flex league. But, one of the things I hear about him over and over again, and I think this is a tired thing to bring up, is, well, he played high-level competition. He's been big games before. And we see time and time some of the more successful guys in the NFL are guys that didn't play for those frontline programs and stuff like that. So while I do love him and think that he'll be a good player, I don't know that I love that as a reason why I love him. But he's a guy I think will have the job this year. And I know that bums you out, Kevin, because I know you grabbed Savage in a few places for cheap and you were snickering, and that's not going to work out for you.
Yeah, I mean, I did grab Savage in a few places earlier in some of these auction drafts. I didn't pay very much for him, and it was really more of a, third or fourth QB option, mostly in 2 QB leagues where I figured he'd be a starter. So that doesn't work out for me so well because I don't think he'll see the field much this year. But at the end of the day, I agree with you on Watson. I think he's a good grab, and I think that people should pick him up, particularly in those 2 QB leagues. Steve, what are your thoughts on his value, how he impacts the Nuke Hopkins value? Obviously, DeAndre Hopkins had a tough year last year playing with Brock Osweiler, and then, of course, Tom Savage. He wasn't what we thought he was going to be. He was hands down in most drafts a first-round pick and just didn't put it all together. Does Deshaun Watson help him or hurt him?
I don't think it hurts him. I don't think it can get much worse than what we saw at the end of last year. So I am with Sal here. I think he is the top QB in this draft. So him going to Houston, I think, only helps DeAndre Hopkins' value. He is going to get the targets. He is the best wide receiver on that team. And the only issue is that like you mentioned, their defense is good. So they might not have to throw the ball a ton, but I think that he is going to do a better job of getting DeAndre Hopkins the ball than any of these other quarterbacks on their roster could have been. And we saw 2 years ago when Hopkins had Brian Hoyer at quarterback, he was a very viable wide receiver. So he doesn't need a top-notch, top 10 quarterback to be a productive wide receiver. He can do that with a middle-of-the-pack guy. So Deshaun Watson absolutely helps his value, and Hopkins is no longer a guy where I'm going to be shunning this year as he was shunned last year.
All right, so in the 3rd round with the 89th pick, they took D'Onta Foreman out of Texas, the running back, who I think it became a little bit trendy for people to knock him. Obviously, he's a bigger guy, 6 feet, 233 pounds. Great, but he kept getting compared to just those big bruising backs, and people saying that he didn't really have good agility and can't really move well and doesn't cut well and can't really get through the hole, and on top of that, a lot of times people thought a lot of the reports that I saw that he didn't break tackles, and for a big guy who doesn't break tackles, that's really not a good combination. But I think when I watched this guy, I think he was a little bit better than he got credit for. I think he has good feet. I think he can be coached in the NFL, and I do think he will complement Miller pretty well. Sal, what are your thoughts on Foreman?
I think you're right about complimenting Miller, and I think that is something that we saw with Miller is that he produces better with less touches, right? So if they could do things with him where he doesn't have to take that pounding, and maybe Foreman could pick up some of that slack, I think it increases Miller's value to actually have him there. Foreman is a guy who we all found out basically during this week that he had a baby that was born and passed away, and we got to see that feature that was done on him on the NFL Network, and it made me start to want to pull for him. So he's a guy I really hope finds success. I also saw the stories about him and his twin brother, and coming out of high school, his twin brother was actually the highly sought after guy, and he told the colleges that unless you bring my brother in with me, I'm not coming. So that's kind of how he ended up where he ended up. And then he had his chip on his shoulder and ended up just becoming a super successful running back. I think one of the saddest parts of that story was the night that he had his biggest game, which I believe was against Texas Tech, which was 300 plus yards and 3 touchdowns, is the night that the baby passed, unfortunately. It was born, I believe, like 19 weeks premature. So I did see where some people thought he should have stayed in school. I think that this guy needed to move on and move forward in his life, and that's probably one of the reasons why he did it. And the good news is his girlfriend is pregnant again. Hopefully everything goes well with that. And while none of that is fantasy relevant, it's just a guy I'm going to pull for and root for and hope that he has a lot of success. And I think he can find it.
Great point there, Sal. Definitely a guy you want to root for sure. So any further thoughts on the Houston Texans before we move along?
I think in the interest of time, we have to move along.
You were always so conscious about the time. I appreciate it.
Yeah, I was going to come in and complain about that too, and maybe I'll just waste a little bit more time.
All right, let's move along to the Jacksonville Jaguars. If Corey Davis was the consensus 1.01 coming out of the draft, Leonard Fournette, the first-round pick for the Jacksonville Jaguars, might be the 1.02. Is that how you see it, Steve?
That is how I'd see it, and I'd still almost have Fournette as the 1.01. Before getting too deep into my film review of all these running backs, I kind of had, Dalvin Cook, Joe Mixon ahead of him. But after watching the tape for all these guys, Leonard Fournette became my surefire number one. I think that he is a prototypical NFL 3-down running back. I don't see very many flaws in his game. A lot of people talk about how he can't catch the ball well, and I don't think that's necessarily true. I just don't think that LSU used him in that way. Because the times that they did have him come out of the backfield and threw him the ball, he was more than able to catch it and turn upfield and get a few yards out of it. He's not going to shake anybody. He's not Christian McCaffrey, but he's the type of guy that's going to lower his shoulder and he's going to run over you, and you're going to feel it. He's the type of guy that's going to wear you down by the fourth quarter, and your defenses are going to want to stop tackling him. You look on NFL.com, they always give these player comparisons. His player comparison is Bo Jackson. I don't think many players get compared to somebody like that.
I saw that, and I definitely chuckled when I saw that, actually.
And it's that's kind of crazy. For anyone to even think that is the type of comparison is just, it gives you an idea of the type of skill that this guy does have. So I am a big Jacksonville Jaguars fan. I know people didn't necessarily like the fit. They addressed their offensive line in the draft. They drafted Cam Robinson, a guy that a lot of people thought was going to go in the first round. And then they also signed another right tackle in free agency. So they are doing things to try and help him out. And they have done enough on defense where they shouldn't be behind in games where they have to abandon the run anymore. So I am all aboard the Leonard Fournette train. I'm a big fan of his. I think that this is one of the better fits in the draft, one of the better fantasy fits that ended up coming out of the weekend.
Steve, how do you feel about him basically putting an end to the Tusks' career?
You know what? Every great, fantastic Hall of Fame career must come to an end at some point.
Talking about Tom Coughlin?
And sometimes you got to pass the torch at some point. So, I mean, he is the Tusk times 100. I mean, he does everything Chris Ivory does, but he's young.
But he's good.
And he's going to be he's going to take over that job. And so, I'm a big fan of his. I was happy with everything that happened with him. I'm all aboard.
So we actually had a conversation before the draft. We were talking about, various fits and things like that. And obviously Leonard Fournette was rumored to go to the Jaguars. And, Steve and I got into it a little bit because I was adamant that the Jaguars should take a tackle. Now, I know there weren't any tackles that were rated in the top 5, and I know that probably would have been a reach. But in my mind, I thought the running back pick was a luxury pick considering the needs that they had. I thought they needed to do a better job of protecting, the quarterback better, and that if you need, if you're going to make Bortles anything, which I think they're going to give him one more shot here, then I think you needed to do a better job of protecting him. He has good weapons already. They had T.J. Yeldon from the second round, and obviously the Tusk is a Hall of Famer, as Steve says. So I thought that they should take, either trade back or take an offensive tackle and reach for one. And it kind of worked out for them, huh, Steve? They get Leonard Fournette at 4, and then they still get the offensive tackle later, the Cam Robinson, who's many thought was the top-rated offensive tackle. So I think that's really going to help them as well as having Fournette. They're doing everything they can to protect Bortles, and getting Cam Robinson later is certainly a huge bonus there.
And let me say that they picked up the 5th year on Bortles, and I am going to be Bortling you guys all year. I'm going to constantly be bringing him up, and he's going to be my flag that I'm going to plant this year. Blake Bortles, top 6 fantasy.
6? Wow!
Bet me anything.
Oh yeah, let's make some bets.
I really just said that.
Let's make some bets right now.
For shock value. A lot of people just looked at their radio or their phones or whatever the hell they listen to. And
hit stop.
But
and
I will say,
and unsubscribe.
I will say he'll be in the top 10 again.
All right, so one other pick that for the Jacksonville Jaguars, they take Dede Westbrook in the 4th round at 110th overall, the wide receiver out of Oklahoma. Westbrook was a guy that a lot of people had high, for a while. Obviously, he was, I think he was in Heisman contention at one point, and he just, kind of fell apart a little bit. Didn't really have the season that he was projected to, and as a result, he dropped in the draft. But obviously a talented guy, and he joins a fairly talented wide receiver core there. So, any thoughts on that on Westbrook for either of you?
I don't like that it crowds up that wide receiver core. I'm a Marquez Lee guy, so I'm hoping that he comes to prominence this year. And I'm all over that. Whoop! And they still have the Allens over there, and again, anything that can help Bortles become a top 6 quarterback, I guess it's a good thing. But does this guy, does he come with did he get kicked out of the combine?
I don't know if he did, to be quite honest with you. That's a good question. We'll have to.
He got kicked out of an interview. That's what
Steve,
it is.
Can you fact check that?
I'll get back to you next week.
All right.
He was kicked out of a combine interview. That's what it was.
Listen, I think when you're talking about a guy that's 6 foot, 178 pounds, it's a pretty slight frame. So overall, there's going to be issues there. Look, he was a community college guy, so clearly there's some issues. He had a domestic violence against the mother of his 2 children he was accused of. So there's that. He wasn't convicted, so obviously, those were allegations and nothing substantial. But obviously that made him slip, and his size and overall measurables kind of helped there. But he does crowd the wide receiver core. To your point, Sal, I do think he probably makes the most impact on a guy like Marquise Lee, who was coming on at the end of last season. So. It definitely makes it a little muddier there, but I still expect Allen Robinson to come back and have a big season. Allen Hurns, I think, will sort of rebound from a terrible season last year, and those will be the 2 guys that I think you need to focus on anyway. So,
Hey, I know that we're pressed for time, guys, and Steve's going to kick me in my ding if I go on any longer.
Whoa.
But let me just read a couple of quick tweets. There was a text from an AFC area scout on Dede Westbrook. No thoughts. It is what it is. He's a degenerate. When NFL scouts asked an OU person, they got better reports on Joe Mixon than Dede Westbrook. And also, he was Todd McShay said he is the first time they heard of any player being kicked out of a 15-minute combine interview. So he comes with tons and tons of baggage.
Yeah, and then
no, sir, I don't like it.
No, not at all. And then there's comparisons to a poor man's Will Fuller who can't separate. So
so he can't separate and drops passes. Excellent.
So look, it's definitely a guy that I think you need to have on your radar if you're looking for a late round wide receiver in a deep league like a 32 team league, Steve or Sal. But other than that, I don't know that you really need to pay too much attention here. So. All right, let's move along to the last team in the AFC South, the Indianapolis Colts, who basically did nothing on offense. They draft a guy, Marlon Mack, out of South Florida, running back, who a lot of people really like coming out of this draft. They knew he was going to be a later round pick, but see a lot of big talent. This is another one that kind of rivals for the top landing spot, I guess. Obviously, it's not, he doesn't have the talent of the Corey Davis and the Leonard Fournette, but obviously the Colts are in need of a running back. This is a guy that can, run a 4.5 40. He's 5'11", 213 pounds. Great overall feet and good. He can catch the ball. But from a fit perspective, Steve, Indianapolis needed help. So.
Yeah, they needed a lot of help. I mean, mostly in keeping Andrew Luck upright and healthy, and they're in severe danger of wasting a lot of the prime of his career. And it's very concerning as, for fantasy players and just, if you're a fan of the Colts, that you have this all-time quarterback that's so good, and they don't seem to be putting the right pieces around him to help them succeed, much like they did when Peyton Manning was there. Peyton Manning had a lot of years where their defense was never up to par, and he spent a lot of time trying to catch up in games and trying to keep pace in games, and it just seems like there were a lot of other ways. I know from a fantasy standpoint, we would like to see more players, but they have T.Y. Hilton, they have Dante Moncrief, they signed Kamar Aiken. They've got fantasy weapons already, so they needed to find ways to help make those even better, to help them make them even more productive. And Marlon Mack, from a dynasty perspective, yeah, he's a pretty good stash. The only thing I would say about him is me and Tony, one of the guys that writes for the website, we were talking about him last night, is that he's just very inconsistent with what he does. One play he'll look and he seems to have really good vision running through a hole. The next one he'll run right up into somebody's backside and, get tackled for just a yard or two. So that would be my only knock on him. I do like the fit. As you said, Frank Gore is going to be retiring soon. He's an old man, much like Sal. So it is just, it was...
You bastard.
from a fantasy standpoint, probably not what we'd like to have seen, and I would have just liked them to try and get Andrew Luck a little more help with the offensive line. Even though there weren't great prospects, that means the better of the prospects were dropping to a spot where Indianapolis was drafting. So felt like they could have probably tried to address that a little bit more.
Yeah, not taking an offensive lineman until the 4th round was pretty surprising for me. Obviously, they did get some good defensive pieces, so hopefully they are improving on the defense. I did like their first two picks in Malik Hooker and Quincy Wilson. Those are both, very good, talented defensive backs that I think they got good value for at those picks. I don't think anyone thought Hooker was going to be around at pick 15, and that's maybe why they didn't go for one of the offensive tackles. But yeah, I agree with you. I think not getting an offensive line help in this draft until the 4th round is really a miss for them. Marlon Mack, in my opinion, like I said, I think he does get extra value for going to the Colts, and I think he'll be bumped up in a lot of drafts, fantasy drafts, just because of that. Sal, any thoughts on the Indianapolis Colts before Steve kicks you in the ding-ding?
As far as Mack goes, you guys pretty much hit on everything. I'd like to see the roles that some of these other guys will play this year. Was it Josh Ferguson? Was that the guy? And obviously Turbin he's really just a backup. Robert Turbin is what he is. But I grabbed Ferguson late in a couple of startup auctions this year because you never know the guy who catch the ball, and I think Mack's gonna play a factor in that. It's another guy you could definitely grab cheap, and a year from now might be an absolute find.
Agreed. All right, so that about does it for the Falafel House podcast. I think it's the first one we've ever done because it sounds like it is. We apologize.
Steve and I were fantastic.
That's right. You were both fantastic. I screwed this one up completely. If you guys want me to not come back next time, that's just let me know.
We're going to vote now? A little bit after once we stop recording. Do you want to do it now?
Yeah, you could just vote now if you want. It's I vote that I stay.
Is yay a no comeback or is nay a no comeback?
Just answer yay or nay, and then we'll decide.
Yay.
All right, so yays have it. I will stay on the podcast, and Steve will get to his finishing thoughts.
All right, thank you guys for coming back after our long layoff during a very important time in the NFL season. You can check us out on Twitter at Falafel House. You can follow us on Facebook. You can find us on Instagram. But most importantly, you can check out falafelhouse.com, where we've got the writing is coming back. Like I mentioned, Tony, he's been putting out a lot of articles, and our own Beta Poo has put out some stuff with him as well, some draft day reactions, and we'll be getting rankings up and getting the train a-moving as we head closer and closer to training camp. Sal.
Yeah, I'll let Kev take care of the DHS. DHS, hello, DHH stuff this week. I'll just remind you guys that if you ever want to talk to us directly, aside from Twitter, we're always available on the Fantasy Life app. You can get us there. It's at Sid Skeed and at Wally Central and at Sal33. It's the best way to have direct conversation with us. You want to tell us that Kevin doesn't belong in a podcast, you come there, you tell us directly. We can respond to you. We are there. All you do is tag us, and we'll pop right in, answer any questions you have about any.
All right, so as Sal alluded to, even though he said he'd let me do it, and then he still kind of did it anyway, we are a member of the Dynasty Happy Hour podcast network. We like to point out that those guys do some great work over there. So definitely go find the Dynasty Happy Hour podcast. You can also check out our friend John Bosch's Fantasy Insanity podcast, the Jet Set Dynasty podcast, the Grab Bag Fantasy podcast, and many others, I think, are still on there, right? I think that's...
I am going to say, I saw John Bosch for the first time on the Bull Rush podcast the other day, and if he bleached his hair, he'd almost look like OBJ. Has anyone told him that before?
Oh, that's weird.
What?
That's the worst comparison I've ever heard.
Steve, go to the eye doctor, buddy.
Fantasy Football Degenerates are also on that podcast network. Listen, go check it out. Go to the website, dynastyhappyhour.com and /podcasts, and you can find all the podcasts. Ours are at the bottom, so we're going to have to talk to those guys about that. But that's it. We will do better next time. We will be back soon with another podcast to talk about another 2 divisions. And until then, Steve, hit the button.